Welcome to our Introduction to the Metric System. I put this little book together to give you some background information about the metric system. We study the metric system because it's important to make measurements in our next couple of units, chemistry and physics. What do we measure? We measure things like distance, volume, and weight. We use different tools to make those measurements, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But why is it important to measure accurately? Just take a look at this picture. It's a fine example of somebody who did not measure accurately. In science class, when it comes to distance, we're going to measure using meter sticks. However, if we need to make longer measurements, we can use things like tape measures. Tape measures come in all different sizes. What we would use in class to measure, say, the distance of the hallway would be called a field tape. You could measure up to 100 meters with it. If we had even longer distances, we might rely on the odometer in our car. It's located in the base of the speedometer, and it measures the distance the car travels. When it comes to volume, we use graduated cylinders. These might not look like much, but they're complicated pieces of scientific equipment. It's important that you handle them carefully because they're very expensive. They are so expensive because they're made so accurately. And when it comes to weight and mass, we can use scales and balances. Weight and mass aren't exactly the same thing. Weight is determined by measuring the effects of gravity on an object, where mass is determined by eliminating the effects of gravity on an object. Mass is the amount of matter in an object, and matter is anything that's going to take up space and have weight. What measurement units do we use? Well, if I asked you how much you weigh, you'd probably say your answer in pounds. If I asked you how tall you are, you would say a certain number of feet in inches. Well, these are all part of our English or imperial system of measurement. And the United States is one of the only countries that still uses this unit of measurement. Not even England, where these measurements came from, do they use this system. And the reason they don't use it is pretty obvious. The units are very complicated, and they're not very easy to use. For instance, the cubit. What is it? It's the tip of the fingers to the elbow of the Egyptian ruler. In fact, if you were to translate the word cubit into English, it means ruler. The inch, well, we all are familiar with inches, but where they come from is lying 3 barleycorns end to end. They came up with this system of measurement to measure people's feet, because in the beginning, shoes only came in 2 sizes, large for men and small for women. That wasn't very comfortable. So the inch was devised in order to measure people's feet. Speaking of feet, we're familiar with the 12-inch foot. That's King Henry's foot. He was the king at the time when that unit of measure was devised. These measurement units you're familiar with: the yard, the mile, fluid ounces, cups, pints, quarts, gallons of gasoline. We've heard all these before. Some you're probably not familiar with: gills, hogsheads, and firkins. Well, a gill is a shot glass size. A hogshead is exactly what it sounds like. When they would butcher the hogs, they wouldn't throw the heads away. They'd scoop out the brains, put a strap on it, use it like a bucket. A firkin is a small wooden barrel. We don't have much use for these things anymore. When it comes to weight, it's just as complicated. There's ounces, not to be confused with the liquid ounce. There's troy ounces. We only use that when we're talking about precious metals like gold and silver. Even when we weigh ourselves, in America, we weigh ourselves in pounds. But if you ask an Englishman how much they weigh, they're going to give you their answer in stone. So, way too complicated. In the 18th century, when we really started getting down to studying science, the French Academy of Science came up with a better system of measurement called the metric system. They wanted to base it on a standard that would never change. So they looked around and they tried to figure out what could we measure that's never going to change. And they decided to use the Earth itself. Well, we know a lot more now than they knew in the 18th century, and we know the Earth is actually changing constantly, but it's still a lot more consistent than using the feet or arm length of a king or queen. So what's wrong with the English system? Well, there's a lot of things when it comes to science. The units are too complicated, and they all had to be memorized. There was no numerical uniformity, so you couldn't make conversions from one unit to another. For instance, there's 12 inches in a foot, but there's 3 feet in a yard, and there's no correlation from those distances to the distance of a mile. And the reason for that is the English system isn't a system at all. It's just a series of historical definitions. So the metric system, the units are simple. There's only 3 base units. It's a complete system, meaning you can measure volume, length, and mass all in the same system. And it's completely numerically uniform. It's all based on multiples of 10. Speaking of the base units, you've heard of these before. The meter, you're familiar with it from the meter stick. The liter, think of the big soda bottle, the 2-liter soda bottle. You're familiar with this size already. And grams, when it comes to weight, you've all heard of that as well. So, all you have to do is memorize meters for length, liters for volume, and grams for weight. These are the base units, and we need these to make our measurements. However, if we're measuring something very large or very small, we have to be able to adjust that base unit. And to accomplish this, the metric system uses prefixes. A prefix is just a syllable you place in front of a word that changes its meaning. And there are 6 prefixes in the metric system: kilo, hecto, deca, deci, centi, and milli. So to master the metric system, you really only need to memorize 9 things, because whether you're measuring length, volume, or mass, you're still going to use these same prefixes. You're just going to add them to the different base units. And there's an easy way to remember these from largest to smallest. We used the mnemonic device, King Henry died unexpectedly drinking chocolate milk. King stands for kilo, Henry for hecto, died is deca. Unexpectedly is the base unit, meter, liter, or gram. Drinking is deci, chocolate is centi, and milk is milli. So if you can remember, King Henry died unexpectedly drinking chocolate milk, you can remember, or you can master, the metric system. Not only can you easily remember the units of the metric system, you can also make conversions in the metric system easily using this system, or using that mnemonic device. Give this class problem a try. See if you can convert meters to kilometers, or to centimeters, or millimeters to meters.